"Don't let them take my dad," one of the twins whispered, his small voice trembling just as the sound of sirens cut through the quiet morning air, sharp and wrong against the calm of a house that had always felt untouchable, a house where everything was supposed to be controlled, measured, and safe, until the front doors opened and the illusion shattered without warning. Adrian Blake stood at the center of his marble-floored foyer, still in his tailored charcoal suit, his expression unreadable, but his posture rigid as two uniformed officers stepped forward, their voices calm yet firm, speaking words that didn't seem to belong in a place like this. Words like investigation and custody and formal procedure. Words that echoed far louder than they should have in a home built to silence noise. Eli and Evan clung to the banister halfway down the staircase, their identical blue eyes wide, confused, searching for answers that no one was giving them, their small fingers gripping the polished wood as if holding on hard enough might stop what was happening below. Adrian didn't look at the officers first. He looked at his sons, and for a brief second something cracked beneath the surface of his composed exterior. Something human, something fragile, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came, replaced by the same controlled calm that had built his empire. "It's going to be all right," he said, his voice steady. But it didn't carry the certainty it used to. Not today, not with strangers standing in his home and questions hanging in the air like a storm that had already begun. The officers moved closer, one of them gently guiding his wrist forward. And though there was no struggle, no raised voices, the moment carried a weight that pressed into every corner of the room, a quiet kind of devastation that didn't need force to be felt. From the edge of the hallway, Maya Brooks stood still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron, watching everything unfold with a focus that didn't match the shock on everyone else's face. Because while the others saw chaos, she saw patterns, small details slipping through the cracks of a scene that felt too precise, too rehearsed, like something had been set in motion long before this moment. She noticed the envelope one officer carried, slightly bent at the corner, stamped with a department seal that didn't align with the jurisdiction she remembered from overheard conversations. She noticed the way Adrian's assistant wasn't present, even though she never missed a morning briefing. She noticed the silence in Adrian himself, not confusion, not panic, but calculation, as if he already knew this was coming and had chosen not to fight it here, not in front of his children. "Daddy?" Evan's voice broke the stillness again, softer this time, almost afraid of the answer, and Adrian turned his head just enough to meet his son's eyes, holding the gaze longer than necessary, as if trying to say everything he couldn't out loud. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, something she had learned to ignore in places like this, because people like her weren't supposed to step forward, weren't supposed to question, weren't supposed to matter beyond quiet routines and invisible work. But this didn't feel like something she could watch from the background. She had spent months in this house, long enough to see the way Adrian always paused at the top of the stairs every night to make sure both boys were asleep, long enough to notice how he read the same book twice just because they liked it, long enough to understand that whatever was happening right now didn't fit the man she had observed in silence. The officers began to guide him toward the door, their movements efficient, controlled, final, and for a moment the entire house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to interrupt, something to stop it. But nothing did. Eli suddenly pulled free from his brother and rushed down the stairs, his small footsteps echoing too loudly against the marble as he reached the bottom just as the door opened, cold morning air spilling inside. "He didn't do anything," he shouted, his voice cracking in a way that made even one of the officers hesitate for half a second, just long enough for Maya to step forward without thinking, her hand gently resting on the boy's shoulder, steadying him before he could fall apart. Completely. Adrian saw it, saw her, and for the first time that morning his eyes changed, not with fear, but with something quieter, something like recognition, like he was placing a silent trust in the only person in the room who wasn't part of the system closing in on him. The door closed behind them a second later, the sound final, clean, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise before it. And in that silence, Maya didn't move right away, because her mind was already working, already pulling at the threads that didn't belong, already asking the one question no one else seemed to be asking. What if this wasn't justice? What if this was a setup waiting for someone to notice? The silence did not last long because silence never does in a house that suddenly feels too large for the people left inside it. And within minutes, the distant hum of the city returned, faint traffic beyond the gates, a lawn sprinkler clicking somewhere outside, ordinary sounds that felt almost offensive against what had just happened. Eli and Evan stood frozen near the entrance, their eyes still fixed on the closed door, as if staring long enough might bring their father back through it. And Maya slowly knelt beside them, her voice gentle but steady, asking them to come sit down, to breathe, to let their hands stop shaking. But neither of them moved at first. They made a mistake, Eli said quietly, not asking, just stating something he needed to believe, and Maya held his gaze for a moment before answering. Then we are going to prove it. The words leaving her mouth before she fully realized she had committed to them, and something in her tone made both boys look at her differently, not like a maid, not like background noise, but like someone who might actually do something. She guided them into the living room, wrapping a blanket around Evan's shoulders when she noticed how cold his hands were, the kind of small detail most people would miss. But Maya never missed details. That was something she had trained herself to do long before she ever stepped into this house wearing an apron. While the boys sat close together on the couch, whispering to each other, Maya moved quietly through the space, her mind replaying everything she had seen that morning, every word, every movement, every inconsistency. And it did not take long for the unease to grow into something sharper, something more defined, because the more she thought about it, the less it made sense. She stepped into Adrian's office, a room she rarely entered, the air still carrying the faint scent of coffee from earlier that morning. His desk perfectly arranged as always, nothing out of place except for one thing. His laptop was still open, the screen dimmed but not locked, which was unusual for a man who never left anything unsecured. Maya hesitated for half a second before stepping closer, her reflection faint in the darkened screen as she tapped the keyboard, bringing it back to life, and a calendar filled with meetings and notes appeared, but one entry caught her attention immediately. A meeting scheduled for that morning that had been abruptly canceled, not by Adrian, but by someone else. And the name attached to it made her chest tighten, Victoria Hale. Maya leaned back slightly, the name settling into her thoughts like a missing piece. Victoria was not just a colleague. She was supposed to be his fiancée, someone who should have been here today, someone who should have been standing beside him, not absent without explanation. She scrolled further, her eyes moving quickly now, scanning timestamps, messages, small inconsistencies that most people would overlook, but not her, not anymore. Her fingers paused over an email thread, one that referenced documents submitted late the night before, documents that had triggered the investigation, but the timestamps did not align with what she remembered hearing the night before when she had passed by this very office, because Adrian had not been here at that time. She was certain of it. A quiet realization settled over her, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough to change everything. This was not a mistake. This was something planned, something executed with precision, and someone inside his world had made it happen. From the living room, Evan's voice called out softly, "Maya, are you still here?" And the question carried more fear than the words themselves. And Maya closed the laptop gently before stepping back into the hallway, her expression calm again, controlled, because whatever she had just uncovered, she could not let it show yet. She walked back into the living room and sat beside them, her hand resting lightly on Eli's shoulder, grounding him the way she had seen Adrian do so many times before. And for a moment she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she was about to do, because this was not her place, not her role, not something she was supposed to step into. But then Eli looked up at her and asked the one question that made everything else irrelevant. "You are not going to leave, right?" And Maya did not hesitate this time. "No," she said quietly, her voice firm in a way that surprised even her. "I am not going anywhere." And as she spoke the words, something inside her shifted from observation to action, from silence to purpose, because this was no longer just about what she had seen, it was about what she was going to do next. The house felt different now, not just quieter but watchful, like every wall had started keeping secrets, and Maya could feel it as she moved through the hallway again, slower this time, more deliberate, because once you see something you cannot unsee it, and once a pattern starts forming, every detail begins to matter. She paused outside Adrian's office before stepping back in, closing the door gently behind her, the soft click sounding louder than it should have, and for a moment she stood still, letting the silence settle, letting her thoughts line up the way they used to when she sat in cramped classrooms years ago, reading case studies, breaking down timelines, asking the one question that always mattered most: who benefits? She moved to the desk again, opening the laptop with more confidence this time, her fingers no longer hesitant as she navigated through folders, email threads, financial summaries, everything that had once felt out of reach now unfolding in front of her. Because Adrian had trusted routine more than suspicion, and whoever set this up had counted on that, the documents that triggered the arrest were easy to find. Once she knew where to look, flagged, highlighted, positioned to be discovered, almost too perfectly arranged, and that was the first thing that made her uneasy again. Real mistakes are messy, but this was clean, organized, designed to point in one direction and one direction only. She opened a file, scanning numbers, transaction records, signatures, and there it was again, the same inconsistency she had noticed earlier. Timestamps that did not align, entries logged at times when Adrian had been somewhere else entirely, and Maya knew that because she had been in the house, she had heard him reading to the boys, had seen him walk them upstairs, had watched the lights go out. Those were not assumptions, those were facts. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing slightly as she cross-checked another document, then another, building a timeline in her head piece by piece, until the pattern became undeniable. These records had been inserted, not created naturally, and that meant someone with access, someone with authority, someone who knew exactly how to make it look real. The name surfaced again without effort: Victoria Hale, not because Maya wanted it to be her, but because every path kept circling back to her, every canceled meeting, every altered document, every absence that should not have been overlooked. Maya exhaled slowly, sitting back in the chair for the first time, allowing the weight of what she was realizing to settle fully, because this was no longer suspicion, this was direction, and direction meant action. A soft knock broke her focus, and before she could respond, Eli pushed the door open just enough to peek inside, his small face drawn with worry. "Are you working?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual, as if he did not want to interrupt something important, and Maya softened immediately, turning the screen slightly away before nodding. "Just trying to figure something out," she said gently. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, something he never did before, and walked over until he stood beside her, looking up at the desk as if he expected to see answers there. "Dad always says if something does not make sense, you have to look at it from a different angle," he said, repeating the words carefully, like they mattered, and Maya felt a small, unexpected smile touch her lips because even now, even in this moment, Adrian was still guiding them. She looked back at the screen, then at Eli, and something clicked, not just in the evidence, but in her approach, because she had been looking at what was there, not what was missing. She turned back quickly, reopening the email thread, this time focusing on gaps instead of entries, and within seconds she saw it. A missing authorization log, a step that should have been recorded but was not, a digital signature that had been bypassed, something only a very small number of people could override, and Victoria was one of them. Maya's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with clarity, the kind that sharpens everything around you, because now she did not just have inconsistencies, she had a breach, something tangible, something that could not be explained away easily. Eli watched her closely, sensing the shift even if he did not understand it. "You found something, did you not?" he asked, and Maya hesitated for only a second before answering. "I think I did." Her voice steady, controlled, but carrying a quiet certainty that had not been there before. From the hallway, Evan called out his brother's name, his voice carrying that same fragile edge, and Eli turned to go, but paused at the door, looking back at Maya one more time. "You are going to fix this, right?" he asked, not as a demand, but as a belief, and Maya held his gaze, feeling the full weight of that trust settle onto her shoulders, heavier than anything she had carried before, but also clearer than anything she had known in years. "I am going to try," she said, and as he left the room, closing the door softly behind him, Maya turned back to the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. No longer just a maid standing in someone else's office, but someone stepping into a role she had once walked away from. Someone who knew exactly what came next, because finding the truth was only the beginning. Proving it was where everything changed. By the time the sun dipped lower behind the tall glass windows of the house, casting long shadows across the polished floors, Maya had already stopped thinking like someone who was helping and started thinking like someone who was responsible. And that shift changed everything about how she moved, how she looked at the details, how she planned what came next. She knew she could not stay inside the house waiting for answers to come to her, because whoever had orchestrated this had already made their move, and time was no longer neutral. It was working against Adrian with every passing hour. In the kitchen, she prepared something simple for Eli and Evan, guiding them gently through routine, because routine was the only thing keeping them steady right now. Small actions like pouring milk, setting plates, asking them about their favorite part of the day, even when neither of them really answered. But she stayed consistent, calm, the way Adrian always had, because she understood something important. Fear grows in silence, but structure keeps it from taking over. Once they were settled in the living room with a movie playing softly in the background, Maya stepped aside, pulling out her phone, her fingers hovering for a moment before she dialed a number she had not called in years, a number she had once memorized without trying, because it had been part of a life she thought she had left behind. The line rang twice before a voice answered, older, sharper, but unmistakably familiar. Daniel Brooks, and Maya closed her eyes briefly before responding. It is me. There was a pause, not confusion, but recognition layered with surprise. Maya, he said, and she could almost picture him straightening in his chair, shifting from routine to alert in an instant. I need help, she said simply, skipping everything else, because there was no time for explanations that did not matter. On the other end, the tone changed immediately, professional instincts taking over. What kind of help? He asked, and Maya glanced back toward the living room, making sure the boys were still within sight before answering. A man was arrested this morning, and the evidence does not line up. The timestamps are wrong. The authorization logs are incomplete, and I think someone inside his company set him up. There was another pause, shorter this time, followed by a quiet exhale. That is a serious claim, Daniel said, but there was no dismissal in his voice, only caution. I know, Maya replied. That is why I am calling you. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before adding, his name is Adrian Blake. And that was enough to shift everything. Daniel did not respond immediately, but when he did, his voice carried a different. Wait, you are telling me you are in Adrian Blake's house right now? Maya glanced around the room, at the high ceilings, the expensive furniture, the life she had been moving through quietly for months. Yes, she said. And his children are here, and they think he is not coming back. The silence that followed was not uncertainty. It was calculation, the same kind she remembered from years ago, the kind that meant he was already building a case in his head. Send me everything you have, Daniel said finally, his tone firm, direct. Every document, every detail. Do not filter anything. Maya nodded even though he could not see her. I will, she said. And then, before she could stop herself, she added, I think Victoria Hale is involved. The name hung in the air between them, and this time Daniel did not pause. That would explain a lot, he said quietly, confirming what Maya had begun to suspect, that this was bigger than she had initially thought. After the call ended, Maya stood still for a moment, her phone still in her hand, feeling the weight of what she had just set into motion, because reaching out meant pulling this situation into a world she had once belonged to, a world that demanded proof, precision, and resilience, and there was no stepping back once you entered it. She returned to Adrian's office, moving quickly now, gathering files, taking photos, organizing everything into something that could be understood, something that could be used, her movements efficient, focused, driven by a clarity that had fully taken hold. From the doorway, Evan appeared again, quieter than before, watching her with wide eyes. Are you talking to someone who can help? He asked. And Maya turned to him, her expression softening just enough to reassure him without giving false promises. Yes, she said. I am. He stepped closer, hesitating before asking the question that mattered most to him. Is Dad going to come home? And this time Maya did not answer right away, not because she did not want to, but because she understood the responsibility behind those words. The difference between comfort and truth. She crouched down to his level, meeting his eyes. I am going to do everything I can to make sure the truth comes out, she said carefully. And though it was not the answer he had asked for, it was the one she could stand behind, the one that carried real meaning. Evan nodded slowly, accepting it in the way children do when they sense honesty. And as he walked back toward the living room, Maya stood up again, turning back to the desk, her reflection faint in the glass of the screen once more. But this time she did not see hesitation, she saw direction. Because the moment she made that call, this was no longer just about noticing what was wrong. It was about proving it in a world that did not make room for mistakes. And Maya Brooks was no longer standing on the outside of that world. She had just stepped back into it completely. The night stretched longer than Maya expected, not because of the hours passing, but because every second now carried weight. And by the time the house had gone quiet and the twins had finally fallen asleep on opposite ends of the couch, the soft glow of the television flickering across their faces, she knew there was no turning back from what she had started. She carefully draped a blanket over them, adjusting it the way Adrian always did, making sure it covered their shoulders completely, a small act that grounded her before she turned away and stepped back into the office, closing the door with a quiet resolve that matched the stillness of the house. Her phone buzzed almost immediately in her hand, and when she answered, Daniel did not waste time. I went through what you sent, he said, his voice sharper now, more focused. You are right, the timestamps are off, but that alone is not enough. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. Maya leaned against the desk, her eyes returning to the laptop screen. There is more, she said. There is a missing authorization log, something that should have been recorded but was not. There was a brief pause on the other end before Daniel responded. That means someone bypassed protocol, and that is not something you can do without high-level clearance. Maya nodded slowly. Even though he could not see her, Victoria Hale, she said again, this time not as a suspicion but as a conclusion. Daniel exhaled quietly. She has access, and she has motive if she stands to gain control while he is out of the picture, but we still need proof that connects her directly. Maya straightened, pushing away from the desk as her mind began moving faster, sharper. Then we find something she did not expect us to look for, she said, her voice steady with a confidence that had been building since the moment Adrian was taken. After the call ended, Maya stood still for a moment, letting the plan begin to take shape, because finding inconsistencies was one thing, but exposing intent required something stronger, something undeniable. She turned back to the laptop, reopening files she had already seen, but this time she was not just looking for errors. She was looking for patterns, habits, anything that could lead her to something real, something traceable. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen until she noticed a series of transfers linked to a subsidiary account, one that had not been flagged in the main investigation, small amounts, spread out over time, designed to avoid attention. But the routing path was unusual, looping through a shell structure that seemed unnecessarily complex for legitimate transactions. Maya leaned closer, her pulse steady but focused, because complexity often hides intention, and intention leaves traces. She followed the trail carefully, cross-referencing timestamps, locations, and authorization points, until she found what she had been looking for, a digital signature embedded within the routing data, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, and when she isolated it, the name attached to it confirmed everything. Victoria Hale. Maya sat back slowly, the confirmation settling in not as surprise, but as clarity, because now she did not just have inconsistencies or suspicions, she had a direct link, something that connected the manipulation to a specific action, a specific person. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was not Daniel, but an unknown number. And for a moment she hesitated before answering. Hello, she said cautiously, and a calm, composed female voice responded. Maya Brooks. The way her name was spoken made her grip tighten slightly, not out of fear, but recognition of control. This is Victoria Hale. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if even the walls were listening now. I was told you have been very busy today, Victoria continued, her tone polite, but layered with something sharper beneath it. I think you may be misunderstanding the situation. Maya did not respond immediately, choosing her words carefully, I am just trying to understand it, she said evenly, and there was a soft, almost amused exhale on the other end. That is exactly what concerns me, Victoria replied. You see, people sometimes involve themselves in things that are far beyond their role, and it rarely ends well for them. The warning was subtle, but clear, and Maya felt it land, not as intimidation, but as confirmation, because people only warn you when they feel threatened. She stepped closer to the desk, her eyes fixed on the screen where the evidence sat, quietly waiting. Then maybe the problem is not my role, she said calmly. Maybe the problem is what I am starting to see. There was a pause, longer this time, and when Victoria spoke again, her tone had shifted just enough to reveal what she had been hiding. Be careful, Maya, she said softly. Some truths are not meant to be uncovered. And then the line went dead. Maya lowered the phone slowly, her expression unchanged, but inside, everything had just sharpened into focus, because this was no longer just an investigation. It was a confrontation, and the moment Victoria reached out, she made one thing very clear. Maya was no longer invisible, and that meant whatever came next would not be easy. But it also meant she was getting closer to something Victoria did not want exposed, and that was exactly where she needed to be. The house no longer felt like a safe place to wait. It felt like a place that could be watched, monitored, even used against her. And that realization settled into Maya's mind as she stood alone in Adrian's office, the faint hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. Victoria's voice still echoed in her thoughts, calm and controlled, not panicked, which meant one thing clearly. She believed she was still in control, and people like that did not make careless mistakes. They made calculated moves, and that meant whatever evidence Maya had found might not be enough on its own. Maya turned back to the laptop, her fingers moving quickly now, copying files, duplicating records, backing everything up in multiple locations because she understood the first rule of uncovering the truth. Never leave it in one place where it can disappear. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Daniel calling back sooner than expected. You are not going to like this, he said without introduction, his tone more urgent than before. Victoria filed an emergency motion an hour ago. Maya felt her chest tighten slightly. For what? She asked, already anticipating the answer. Temporary custody evaluation, Daniel replied. She is positioning this as a situation where the children are not safe in that house without Adrian, which means they could be removed within 24 hours if the court agrees. Maya closed her eyes briefly, the weight of that information settling heavily, because this was no longer just about clearing Adrian's name. It was about protecting the only leverage he had left, his children. She turned toward the living room instinctively, as if she could see through the walls to where Eli and Evan were sleeping, unaware of how quickly everything could change again. Then we do not have 24 hours, she said quietly, more to herself than to Daniel. We need something solid. Something that forces a delay or stops this entirely. Daniel exhaled slowly. I agree, but what you have right now is strong, not decisive. We need something direct, something that shows intent beyond doubt. Maya's mind moved rapidly, replaying the call, Victoria's tone, the timing, the confidence, and then something clicked, something she had overlooked before because she had been focused on the digital evidence. She called me, Maya said suddenly. And Daniel paused. What do you mean she called you? Maya straightened, her thoughts sharpening into a clear line. She knew I was looking into this. She warned me to stop. There was a brief silence before Daniel responded, his voice more alert now. Did you record it? Maya's grip tightened slightly on the phone. No, she admitted, frustration flickering beneath her calm. But I can get her to say it again. The idea formed as she spoke it. Risky, uncertain, but possible. Daniel hesitated, weighing it quickly. That is dangerous. If she suspects anything, she already does. Maya interrupted quietly. That is why it might work. She glanced back at the laptop screen, at the evidence she had gathered, knowing it was strong but not enough to stop what was coming. She thinks I do not belong in this world, that I will hesitate, that I will back down. Maya continued, her voice steady. She is wrong. On the other end, Daniel was silent for a moment longer before responding. If you do this, you need to be precise. No mistakes. You need her to confirm something actionable, not just threaten you. Maya nodded. already thinking through the approach, the wording, the timing. "I understand," she said, and after a brief exchange of instructions, the call ended, leaving her alone again with the weight of the plan she had just set in motion. She stood still for a moment, letting the fear rise and pass through her without taking control, because fear was not something to ignore, it was something to move through, and once it settled, what remained was clarity. She stepped out of the office and walked quietly into the living room, where Eli and Evan were still asleep. Their small forms curled into the couch, the soft light from the television casting shadows across their faces, and for a moment Maya just stood there, watching them, understanding fully what was at stake. Not just a reputation, not just a company, but a family that could be torn apart before it had a chance to understand what was happening. Eli shifted slightly, his hand reaching out in his sleep as if searching for something familiar, and Maya gently placed her hand in his, letting him settle again, a silent promise passing between them even though he was not awake to hear it. She pulled her hand away slowly and stepped back, her expression firm now, resolved in a way it had not been before, because this was no longer about whether she could do this. It was about the fact that she had to. Returning to the office, she picked up her phone again, her fingers steady as she scrolled to the number that had called her earlier, the one she had not saved but would not forget, and without giving herself time to hesitate, she pressed call, bringing the phone to her ear as it rang once, twice, and then connected. Victoria's voice answering with the same calm control as before. "Maya," she said smoothly, as if she had been expecting this, and Maya took a slow breath before speaking, her voice even, deliberate. "We need to talk about what you did." The line stayed quiet for a fraction longer than it should have, not empty, but measured, as if Victoria was deciding exactly how much to reveal and how much to hold back. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried that same composed control that made everything she said feel deliberate. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to call," she said calmly, and Maya did not rush to respond, because timing mattered now, every second, every word, every pause. She stepped closer to the desk, her eyes fixed on the faint reflection in the laptop screen, grounding herself in the moment. "You already knew I would," Maya replied evenly, letting the statement sit rather than turning it into a question, and there was a soft, almost approving exhale from the other end. "You are more perceptive than I expected," Victoria said, and there it was again, not denial, not confusion, but acknowledgement hidden inside a compliment. Maya pressed forward carefully, her voice steady but firm. "The documents, the timestamps, the missing authorization log. None of it lines up unless someone with access made it that way." She paused just long enough to let the implication settle before adding, "Someone like you." The silence that followed was heavier this time, not because Victoria was surprised, but because she was adjusting, recalculating how to handle a situation that was no longer entirely within her control. "You are stepping into something far more complicated than you understand," Victoria finally said, her tone still, smooth, but now carrying a faint edge beneath it, something sharper, something closer to warning than conversation, and Maya did not step back from it, because this was the moment she needed, the moment where pressure reveals truth. "Then explain it to me," Maya said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you built a case around him and made sure it would hold just long enough to remove him from the picture." She let the words settle, each one placed carefully, not accusing outright, but close enough to force a reaction. Victoria let out a soft laugh, the sound controlled, almost amused. "You make it sound so intentional," she said, but the phrasing itself was revealing, not denying the action, only reframing the motive, and Maya caught it instantly, her grip tightening slightly around the phone. "It is intentional," Maya replied calmly, "and you did not just target him, you are going after his children too." This time there was no immediate response, and the silence stretched just long enough to confirm what Maya needed to hear without words, because hesitation in someone like Victoria was not accidental, it was a crack. "The situation with the children is about stability," Victoria said finally, her tone returning to controlled professionalism, "but the shift had already happened, and you believe removing them from their home right after their father was taken is stability?" Maya asked, pressing just enough, not pushing too far, keeping the balance between challenge and control. Another pause followed, shorter this time, and when Victoria spoke again, there was something new in her voice, something closer to irritation. "You are focusing on the wrong part of this," she said. "Adrian made decisions that put everything at risk. I'm simply ensuring that what he built does not collapse because of them." The words landed with weight, not because of what they said, but because of what they implied, and Maya felt it immediately, that subtle shift from distance to involvement, from observer to participant. "So you stepped in and made sure he could not interfere," Maya said quietly, and this time Victoria did not correct her, did not redirect, did not deny. Instead, she responded with something far more revealing. "Sometimes leadership requires difficult choices," she said, her tone firm now, less polished, more certain, and that was it. The moment Maya had been waiting for, not a full confession, not a clear admission, but enough to show intent, enough to expose the mindset behind the actions. Maya remained silent for a beat, letting Victoria's own words settle into the space between them, because silence often forces people to fill it, and Victoria did not disappoint. "You should step away from this," she added, her voice lowering slightly. "You are not equipped to handle what comes next." And Maya felt something shift inside her at those words, not fear, but resolve sharpening into something unbreakable, because everything Victoria had said only confirmed one thing. She believed Maya would stop. "You are wrong," Maya said quietly, her voice calm, but carrying a weight it had not before. "I already know enough to prove this was not an accident." Another pause followed, longer this time, and when Victoria spoke again, her tone had lost some of its earlier ease, replaced by something tighter, more controlled. "Be careful what you think you know," she said, and then, without another word, the line went dead. Maya lowered the phone slowly, her heartbeat steady, not racing, because this was not panic. This was clarity, the kind that comes when uncertainty finally gives way to direction. And she turned back toward the laptop, already moving, already organizing the pieces she had just secured, because now she did not just have inconsistencies or patterns, she had intent, she had language, she had something that could not be dismissed as coincidence. Outside the office, the house remained quiet, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt like a place on the edge of something shifting, something about to change, and as Maya gathered the files and prepared to send everything to Daniel, she understood one thing with complete certainty. This was no longer a question of whether the truth existed. It was a question of whether she could bring it into the light before it was too late, and for the first time since the morning began, she believed that she could. The moment the files finished uploading, Maya felt the shift, not in the room, not in the house, but in the direction of everything that was about to unfold, because evidence only mattered when it reached the right hands at the right time, and now it had. Her phone buzzed almost instantly, Daniel's name lighting up the screen, and she answered before the second ring. "Tell me you see it," she said quietly. And on the other end there was no hesitation. "I see all of it," Daniel replied, his voice sharper than it had been all day, focused in a way that meant something had clicked on his side too. "The financial routing, the missing authorization, and whatever you got her to say on that call, it is enough to push for an emergency hearing." Maya exhaled slowly, not relief, not yet, but something close to it. "How fast?" she asked, already knowing speed was everything now. "I am filing within the hour," Daniel said. "If the judge accepts it, we can challenge both the charges against Adrian and the custody motion at the same time." Maya turned toward the hallway instinctively, where the faint sound of movement told her the boys were starting to wake up, and the thought grounded her again, reminding her why every second mattered. "You need to be ready," Daniel continued. "If this moves forward, you may be asked to testify, to explain how you found all of this." Maya did not hesitate. "I will be ready," she said, and for the first time there was no trace of doubt in her voice. Only certainty. After the call ended, Maya stepped out of the office, the house slowly coming back to life around her, soft footsteps from the living room, the quiet murmur of two voices trying to make sense of a world that had shifted overnight. And when she walked in, Eli and Evan were sitting up on the couch, the blankets still wrapped around them, their eyes searching her face the moment they saw her. "Did something happen?" Eli asked, his voice carrying that fragile hope that had not left him since the morning before, and Maya knelt in front of them, her expression calm but more certain than it had been. "We are working on it," she said gently. "And things are starting to move." Evan leaned forward slightly, his small hands gripping the edge of the blanket. "Does that mean Dad is coming back?" he asked, and this time Maya allowed herself a small, steady nod. "It means we are closer," she answered carefully, because she had learned that hope needed to be built on truth, not promises. The morning moved quickly after that, faster than any of them expected, because once the process started, it did not wait. And within a few hours, Daniel called again, his tone carrying urgency. "The hearing is set for this afternoon," he said. "This is happening now." Maya stood still for a moment, letting the words settle, because everything she had done up to this point had led to this, the moment where truth would either hold or collapse under pressure. "What do you need from me?" she asked, already moving back toward the office, already preparing. "Stay available," Daniel said. "Keep your phone on, and be ready to speak if they call you in." Maya nodded, even though he could not see her. "I understand," she said, and when the call ended, she placed the phone down for a second, her hands resting lightly against the desk as she took a slow breath, steadying herself, not because she was unsure, but because she knew exactly how much this moment mattered. Outside, the sky had shifted from the soft gray of early morning to a clearer blue, sunlight cutting through the tall windows and casting long lines across the floor. And for the first time since everything began, the house did not feel heavy. It felt like it was waiting. Maya returned to the living room, sitting beside the boys, who had moved closer together. Again, their shoulders touching, their eyes fixed on her as if she were the only steady point in a world that kept changing around them. And she placed a hand on each of their shoulders, grounding them the way she had learned to ground herself. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, "we face it together." Eli nodded immediately, his expression firm despite his age, while Evan leaned slightly into her side, drawing comfort from her presence without saying a word. Hours passed in a way that felt both slow and fast at the same time, each minute stretching while the clock continued forward without pause. And then finally, the call came, Daniel's name flashing on the screen again, and Maya answered without hesitation, her heart steady, her voice calm. "Tell me," she said, and on the other end, there was a brief silence before Daniel spoke, his tone carrying something new, something that had not been there before. "They are bringing him in," he said. "The court wants to hear everything." And in that moment, everything narrowed into focus, not the house, not the past, not even the fear, just the next step, the one that would decide everything. And Maya stood up slowly, her hand still resting lightly on Eli's shoulder for a brief second before she stepped away, because the moment she had been preparing for was no longer coming. It had arrived. The courthouse did not feel as grand as Maya expected. It felt tight, controlled, every sound echoing just enough to remind everyone that what happened inside these walls carried weight beyond the moment. And as she stood just outside the courtroom doors with her phone still in her hand, Daniel's last words replayed in her mind. "They are bringing him in. The court wants to hear everything." Her reflection in the glass panel beside the door looked unfamiliar to her for a second, not because she had changed on the outside, but because something inside her had settled into place, something steady and unshaken. And when the doors opened, she stepped forward without hesitation. Inside, the room was already in motion, quiet conversations, papers shifting, people preparing, and at the center of it all stood Adrian Blake, no longer in his home, no longer in control of his environment, but still composed, still standing straight despite everything that had been placed against him. And for a brief moment his eyes met Maya's across the room, and there was recognition there, not surprise, not confusion, but something deeper, something that understood exactly why she was there. The proceedings moved quickly, voices measured, questions structured, but beneath the calm surface there was tension building, because the narrative that had been carefully constructed was beginning to shift. And when Daniel stood to present the new evidence, the room seemed to narrow, every detail now under scrutiny, every assumption no longer safe. Maya listened as the documents were introduced, the inconsistencies laid out clearly, the missing authorization logs, the manipulated timestamps, the financial routing that did not align with the official records. And then came the moment that mattered most, the part that turned suspicion into intention, the call, her voice steady even as it played back through the room. Victoria's responses following, controlled at first, then shifting, revealing just enough to expose the truth behind the actions. The reaction was subtle but undeniable, a shift in posture, a glance exchanged between officials, the kind of movement that signals something has changed, something important. Victoria sat across the room, her expression composed but no longer effortless, her control now. Something she had to maintain rather than something she naturally held. And for the first time since this began, Maya saw what lay beneath it, not panic, but pressure, the kind that builds when certainty starts to crack. The questions that followed were sharper now, directed, focused, no longer accepting surface answers. And when Victoria responded, her words remained polished, but the foundation beneath them had shifted. Because once doubt enters the room, it does not leave easily. Time moved differently in that space, each second carrying more weight than the last, until finally the judge spoke, the tone calm but decisive, acknowledging the new evidence, the inconsistencies, the need for further review. And then the words that changed everything. The immediate reconsideration of the charges, the halt on the custody motion, the recognition that what had been presented was not as it first appeared. It was not dramatic, not loud, but it was enough to break the direction this had been heading, enough to create space for truth to stand. Adrian did not react immediately, but when he did, it was not to the room. It was to the space behind Maya, as if he could already see beyond this moment, beyond the process, to where everything truly mattered. And when the proceedings paused, when the tension released just enough for reality to return, Maya stepped back slightly, her role shifting once more, not from importance, but from center to foundation, because she had done what she came to do. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter in a way that was not complete, but real. And when Adrian finally walked out, no longer held in the same way as before, his steps steady, his presence unchanged despite everything. Eli and Evan were already there, guided carefully through the hallway, their small faces searching until they found him. And in that moment, everything else fell away, the questions, the tension, the complexity, leaving only what mattered. They ran to him without hesitation, their arms wrapping around him with a force that carried every emotion they had held back, and Adrian knelt down, holding them close, his composure breaking just enough to reveal the truth beneath it, that nothing he had built, nothing he had protected, mattered more than this. Maya stood a few steps away, watching, not as an outsider anymore, but as someone who had become part of the reason this moment existed. And when Adrian looked up, his eyes meeting hers once again, there was no need for words, because some things do not need to be spoken to be understood. Later, when the noise faded and the day settled into something quieter, something real, Adrian stood beside her. Near the courthouse steps, the city moving around them as it always did, unchanged by what had just happened. And for a moment neither of them spoke, because silence now carried something different, not uncertainty, but acknowledgement. "You saw what no one else did," he said finally, his voice steady but softer than before, and Maya shook her head slightly, her gaze steady. "I just paid attention," she replied, and there was a faint smile in his expression, not because the situation was simple, but because the truth had found its way through something that was meant to hide it. He looked back toward his sons, then back at her, and the words